So the video game industry has this really interesting trend. I could make like a whole side video or something about this. I feel like I could give a presentation about this. The games industry has a really interesting, I don't know what you'd call it. It's like a sociology topic. Essentially, the audience of the core audience of video games, at least in the US, like North America, was initially like children. If you look at like the Magnavox Odyssey and the 2600 and stuff like that, those were marketed towards families. Those were marketed as things that the whole family could enjoy. You watch old Atari 2600 ads or something, and they got like grandma playing Warlords or something like that, and she's having a ball. Then, of course, Atari pulls out of the console industry, the console market to focus on PCs. The market just... And then Nintendo comes in like 2-ish years later and revitalizes it. And one of the major differences with Nintendo is that Nintendo marketed their games primarily at children. Like children and like teens. Middle school, elementary, middle school, maybe high school. Nintendo marketed their stuff towards kids first and foremost. They wanted to make sure that they were completely different. I talked about this a bit in my console aesthetics video. They wanted to make it known, obviously, that they were completely different from Atari. They weren't going to burn retailers like Atari had. And part of it was presenting games as a child's thing, as a kind of toy, and that they were going to market this in a very different way. As opposed to, it's not just a video game console, it does a bunch of things. It's like a multimedia thing. Look, we have a robot. That means that the core audience, who were usually like little boys, well, as they grow up, some of them fall out of the hobby or something, but a certain amount of them stick with it. And now they're teenagers, and you start looking at the later console generation. You look at the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Genesis is marketed as being a little edgier. Comes out a few years later. You look at the N64. I don't know. N64 didn't have a lot of support nor a lot of games. But the PlayStation, you look at the PlayStation 1, and you're like, okay, now like they recognized there is a much wider audience of people that we can make games for. We can make games for teenagers. We can start kind of approaching the, college-aged market, let's say. We can make more adult games. We can have a spectrum of age ranges that we appeal to, and that's because the audience literally grows up. The audience of gaming is really interesting because it has grown up over time with the years, and you see that reflected in the types of games that are made, the way that consoles and games are marketed, and all this interesting stuff about the marketing perceptions. Like, okay, you get to like the Xbox, maybe the Xbox 360 era, right? And all of a sudden you hit like the 2000s, and it's like, oh my god, you'd think that it all they're trying to do is appeal to like frat bros. And it's like, why are they trying to appeal to frat bros? It's because they're trying to look, because some fucking 40-year-old marketing executive's trying to look hip. He's trying to look hip and be like, whoa, did you know Dead or Alive has boobs in it? Oh, whoa, this makes me want to chug some brewskis. Because they're marketing towards like teenagers who want to feel like cool adults or something like that. Up until now, you get things like the the trend of dad games. I find that's a term I've heard. That's like Last of Us or God of War. It's like games about being a dad. You know, parenthood. Like, how many games, genuinely, how many games can you look at from the 90s and say that a major theme of them is parenthood? There's been like a couple notable ones in the like have been pushed as first or second party titles. Obviously, God of War, Last of Us. There was that Returnal game, which I'm pretty sure was something about parenthood. Like, this is a thing now because there are parents. There's like 30-something people, 40-year-old something people who play video games now. You can make games that hit on themes that resonate with them specifically. Maybe there wasn't a market for that before. So the aging demographics of the games industry, I think that like as it goes on, it continues to get older. And I think that within the next 10 or 20 years, we'll see that it reaches, I think 60 is about the max where it really matters. I think once most people hit 70, people are not really making, honestly, anything for people who are like 70 specifically, like 70 plus. I'm sorry. You're yesterday's news. You're consuming things for the younger peoples. There are still things that are being made for older audiences, let's say in movies, the film industry, the music industry, and older. Like once you hit a certain point, your tastes are kind of settled, and it doesn't really matter how much older you get. I think that once we hit that like 60, that like 60s range of games, like there's once like someone's grandma is playing video games, I think that's the point where gaming will reach a level of like cultural saturation where it becomes a sort of a mainstay in the way that movies are. Because that's like when you get generational. There are like films are a generational medium. Music is a very generational medium. Books are as well, right? It never stops being a thing. Gaming as a fledgling industry, I don't think has reached that foothold. Quite reached that foothold yet. It's very strongly entrenched in our society, especially economically, because it's like the highest grossing entertainment industry that's out there. But I suspect that as we go along, more and more games will be made that appeal and cater to older audiences, and perhaps it will be seen as something that's actually viable to make games that are not just games as a service, squeeze as much money out of your parents' credit card games, and by big publishers. Although I doubt it. I think that it's funny because I find that there's so many people with business degrees, with like these economic degrees, where it's like your job is to understand business, but you're like bad at it, which is interesting. Because I feel like a lot of business is understanding people and what they want and what interests them or appeals to them. But a lot of people who are interested in business actually just like money and not like humanity. So there's kind of like a disconnect where they don't really understand what they're actually, like who they're even selling things to. They're just like, oh, like a big cash cow. That's what you are. Anyway, I've been talking about this for too long.